So being a US citizen living in one of the largest countries in the world, I've often asked myself how I'm going to handle these huge civilizational states. Russia, China, India, the US. They're so intimidating because it feels like you could cover so much and still have barely scraped the surface. And again, there's the fact that I live in one of them. So today will be a bit of a trial. Welcome to the very first Nick Geo series known as 50 Nifty United States, kind of like the song. Basically for these, I'm sort of going to combine aspects of the cities videos, the notable sites videos, and just the general overview ones. We'll touch on land, we'll touch on the cities, we'll touch on the history, you know, all the fun stuff. But considering how different all of the states are, it would be very tough to apply one formula across all of them. I mean, can you imagine how different the 5 cities in Florida would be versus 5 cities in Wyoming? And I figure we'd best start with my home state, Pennsylvania. Apologies in advance if this seems a little bit disorganized, but it's the state that I know the most about. We're going to nosedive right into this. Pennsylvania, abbreviated simply as PA, is actually one of 4 Commonwealth states along with Massachusetts, Kentucky, and Virginia. Do not ask me why, I truly don't know. Its capital is Harrisburg, the nickname is the Keystone State, the flag looks like this. There are 67 counties, and it has a population of about 13 million as of 2024. Pennsylvania was indeed one of the 13 original colonies, and it was the second one to join the Union in December of 1787. It's had the same exact shape and border since 1792 when it acquired the Erie Triangle from New York, and it's very much just shaped like a box other than on the east side, sharing a border with New Jersey, New York, and Delaware. The other states that it borders are West Virginia, Maryland, and Ohio. Growing up, I was kind of taught that it resembles the shape of a hand if you hold it flat like this. These boundaries were actually charted as far back as 1681, however, New York didn't recognize this until the following year. The name actually comes from this man, William Penn, a translation in Latin to Penn's Woods, as King Charles II granted his petition for it. Skip ahead about 100 years to 1760, the Mason-Dixon line was drawn between it and Maryland, and it's named that as 2 English surveyors named Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon scaled that in the following decade. And as we all know, about 100 years after that, this line would become very important in the US Civil War. Oh, and apparently Connecticut had claims to Pennsylvania until the Continental Congress of 1782. I actually did not know that prior to researching this video. In terms of inhabitants, many native tribes existed here before colonization, some of the most notable ones being Erie, Huron, and Iroquois. And of course, some of the earliest settlers here were the Quakers, the Anglicans, the German Lutherans, and Dutch Calvinists. If you're wondering why I got the name Penn's Woods, I imagine it would be the abundance of, woods. I mean, seriously, I have driven all around this state, and this state is very much known for having all sorts of backwater towns. A lot of them are in the middle of the forest and behind the mountains that probably got internet 10 years ago. Geographically speaking, Pennsylvania is considered a mid-Atlantic state, found in the northeast, and it is actually landlocked thanks to New Jersey. The border between those states is formed by the Delaware River, and Lake Erie can be found up in the northwestern tip, one of the 5 Great Lakes with a city of the same name along the coast. I got to visit that as a kid. It was very beautiful. Running through the state, mostly on the western half, is a decent part of the Appalachian Mountains, known as the Appalachian Plateau, which extends all the way to the Erie Plains. The highest point would be Mount Davis at over 3,200 feet, or just under 1,000 meters above sea level. Besides the aforementioned Delaware River, there's also the Susquehanna River, which starts in central New York and empties into the Chesapeake Bay. This is one of the largest rivers on what is known as the Eastern Seaboard, which is all of these states. And of course, in the northwest, there is the Ohio River flowing into the massive Mississippi River. As you can see by this map, several major highways run through the state, with I-80 bisecting it horizontally. 476 goes north and south in the east, 76 and 78 in the lower half, and just a tiny portion of I-95 is in the southeast near Philly. A fun little fact I learned in a criminal justice class in college: Allentown is apparently the drug capital of Pennsylvania, probably because it's the closest bigger city to where a lot of these connect. Oh, that was a lot of geography. The last couple country videos I did were very tiny. People in Pennsylvania like to joke that when somebody out of state asks where we're from, we say basically Philly or basically Pittsburgh. Even though it's a pretty big state, there's far more to it than that. Philadelphia is the biggest city and has some of the most significant history. For those that don't know, this is indeed where the Declaration of Independence was signed, and it's the first World Heritage City in the entire US. This is also where you'll find the Liberty Bell, which was actually moved during the American Revolution, and it got that crack from being told during the funeral of Chief Justice John Marshall. Here, enjoy a picture of 17-year-old me standing next to this. There's a whole center for this in what is known as the Historic District, and you can also visit the Congress and Independence Halls. Betsy Ross's home is here, she's the one that created the first US flag, and Elfreth's Alley is one of the nation's oldest inhabited streets. Oh, and Philly was actually the capital of the United States until 1800, so before the White House was built, this is where the original president's house was. You can see this today, and that's where George Washington and John Adams lived. Several museums, such as the African American Museum, the National Constitution Center, and of course Franklin Square, exist in Philly. Obviously, there's all sorts of big stadiums here because US citizens love football, American football for my European friends. We've got the Wells Fargo Center where the Flyers play, the Lincoln Financial Field where the Eagles play, and the Citizens Bank Park where the Phillies play. Philly is very much known for its cheesesteaks, its pretzels, and having the worst sports fans in the world. Whoa, okay, easy, it was a joke, don't riot over it. Something people like to travel here for is the Eastern State Penitentiary, which becomes a haunted attraction around the Halloween season, but otherwise does ghost tours and regular historical tours the rest of the year. The Reading Terminal Market and the Philadelphia Zoo are also huge draws for people. Lots of universities, music venues, and the likes of that kind of entertainment are scattered throughout. As much as I'd love to dive deeper, we've already spent a lot of time on just Philly alone, so we're gonna move forward. Guess we'll move to basically Pittsburgh. No, we'll go to actual Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's oldest architectural site would be the Fort Pitt Block House, built in 1764 as a key part of the British defense during the French and Indian War. Pittsburgh was also the main grounds for what was known as the Whiskey Rebellion. This was basically an uprising of farmers and distillers in the general area in 1794 due to a whiskey tax. That ain't as American as it gets, I don't know what is. President Washington would actually send in troops to quell what was feared to be a full-blown revolution. Boy, ain't that an example of some sheer irony. In 1790, Alexander Hamilton called for this whiskey tax due to incurred debts, which hurt the small distillers while the larger ones thrived with tax breaks. Wow, I can't get over how familiar this all sounds. Okay, Nick, stay focused. Because of this, you can now see the site known as the Whiskey Rebellion Trail. Stadiums here include the Acrisure Stadium, where the Steelers play, the PNC Park, where the Pirates play, and the PPG Paints Arena, where the Penguins play. The name of the Steelers likely has something to do with the fact that over the years, Pittsburgh became a large town for steel production. There's also the Carnegie Museum of Art, the Andy Warhol Museum, and the Phipps Conservatory and Botanical Gardens. Just outside of it is the famous Monroeville Mall, where Dawn of the Dead was filmed, and Night of the Living Dead was also filmed out in this area too. So now we'll look at some smaller cities, including my home city of Lancaster, and yes, it is pronounced Lancaster, not Lancaster. Remember when I mentioned those German and Dutch settlers? Well, people actually come to Lancaster to see the Amish, which is basically descendants of those people that never really continued forward with that whole technology thing. These people are a very old school branch of Dutch and German Christians that don't believe in electricity in the home or rubber tires on the tractors and all sorts of things like that. They mainly farm, but many of the Amish know fabrication trades as well. And they're actually somewhat of a controversial topic in my area due to road damage, poor animal treatment, and a whole plethora of other things I won't dive into. But while these farms surround the suburbs, the city itself is a cozy little downtown area that sometimes has Pennsylvania Dutch influence sneak its way in. It's a pretty industry-heavy area and is known for its Central Market, Fulton Theater, Thaddeus Stevens College of Technology, and has a pretty vibrant scene of bars, breweries, and the likes. And this is actually where the 15th President James Buchanan was from. You can still see his house at the Wheatlands like 10 minutes away from where I live. Should you decide to visit, you might want to try whoopie pies and other foods that are rare to find outside of the general vicinity. Skipping over a little is the city of Hershey, PA, named after Milton Hershey. If you're a fan of chocolate, you've probably had one of his products, and there's a large theme park built next to the original factory known as Hershey Park. Out in the middle of the countryside is where you'll find the Penn State University and State College main campus with Beaver Stadium, and the further into these regions you go, the more you'll find loads of older backwoods towns. Allentown is the third most populous city in the state, and actually some of the first resistance to the British in the American Revolution happened here. There's another theme park nearby called Dorney Park. Some other nearby cities include Scranton and Bethlehem, and believe it or not, the capital of Harrisburg falls below even these and Lancaster in terms of population. Other larger cities include Altoona, Williamsport, and Wilkes-Barre. Looking at the Civil War, Pennsylvania was right along the Mason-Dixon line, so obviously it played a pretty big role there. Actually, nah, there were only like 2 battles fought here and only one that really mattered. Gettysburg National Memorial Park is easily the most important one for us, as this was very much a turning point battle, which you can also take ghost tours of at night. Fort Mifflin can also be found near Philadelphia, which was an old Union prison, and the other battle that took place here, the Battle of Hanover, was only about 15 miles from Gettysburg. Pennsylvania is home to not the oldest brewery, but the oldest one still in operation, that being Yuengling in the city of Pottsville. The founder was David Yuengling, a German immigrant in 1829. Though once again, looking back to some of our Quaker settlers, people in PA will tell you that we have some of the worst liquor laws. Only about 6 or 7 years ago did it become possible to buy beer at a grocery store or gas station, and even now it's very limited. If it isn't obvious by now, agriculture is a massive part of the state's economy, which actually has roots in the Native American peoples that lived here before us. Later, Lancaster and York counties would become hubs for German settlers. Some of the brands included here you might be familiar with are Herz, Dietz & Watson, Heinz, Annie Ann's, and Victory Brewing. Believe it or not, mining played a large role in the state's history, and there is certainly no shortage of caves to be found. Penn's Cave is actually the only all-water cave in the entire US which you can take a boat ride through. I did this as a small child and it terrified me, probably because my cousin told me there were man-eating fish in there. There's also the Crystal Cave, the Indian Echo Caverns, and the Laurel Caverns, which is the largest one in the state. PA has its own Grand Canyon, simply called Pennsylvania Grand Canyon, and it's famous for the Pine Creek Rail Trail, running through an old rail bed going along the Pine Creek Gorge. People here also like to visit the Pocono Mountains, where one might ski at the resorts in the winter, or visit the old historic towns and the natural beauty in the summer. Speaking of which, Pennsylvania is very susceptible to super hot summers and very freezing winters. Unfortunately, there's not much room in between for fall and spring. Centralia is an abandoned ghost town famous for the Route 61 highway found here, which until recently was nicknamed Graffiti Highway. Folks would come here and add to the artwork, as well as drive around motorcycles and sports vehicles. I actually went there about 5 years ago, but unfortunately you no longer can. The tallest waterfall in PA is known as the Raymond Skill Falls at 178 feet, which can be reached by the Creek Trail nearby. Ganoga Falls is in Ricketts Glen State Park and is home to 22 different named waterfalls. Oh yeah, and I should mention there are a lot of state parks, including Marsh Creek, Susquehannock, Hickory Run, Little Buffalo, Caledonia, and many more. Valley Forge National Historical Park is the site of the winter encampment of the Army during the U.S. Revolution, where you can find reconstructions of some of the old buildings. Sickman's Mill near my town of Lancaster is a popular spot for water tubing, and Mount Gretna can be found a little further up for the beach-like setting. Remember, we have no actual coasts here. In terms of animal, you'll find the eastern gray squirrel just about anywhere, the black bear is our only bear species, and raccoons and red foxes aren't uncommon to spot. Public gardens such as Longwood Gardens and Morris Arboretum are a common attraction across the state. Something I just learned about also is the Falling Water House. It was built in 1935 in the southwestern part of the state, and it's quite literally a house built on a waterfall, where the water runs through the architecture, and it became a museum in the 60s. Now, I touched on some of the foods like pretzels and whoopie pies, but there are also some others. Pennsylvania is known for something called scrapple, which is basically ground up and fried meat remnants eaten for breakfast. Stromboli, tomato pie, and other Dutch, German, and Amish influenced things like apple butter are common. Sauerkraut, which is a pickled cabbage usually eaten with pork, and it's a common dish on New Year's Day. Because nothing says good luck like rotted cabbage and the most bland meat that exists, am I right? Apple dumplings and chicken pot pie are also a staple. You might hear several different Pennsylvania accents. I mentioned Pennsylvania Dutch earlier. Much of my family still has this accent, especially the older members. I have it a little bit. It's not uncommon to find cultural festivals such as the Scotch and Irish festivals, as well as old traditional folk ones. And in the rural areas, this state really loves their fairs and carnivals, especially in the woodsy and farm towns. I would say the majority of Pennsylvania has been heavily shaped by Christianity, but you could probably say that about a lot of states, and honestly, as the younger generations grow up, this is getting less and less common. You might hear about Mennonites, which is sort of a more modernized Amish, if you will. They hold a lot of the same principles, except they believe in electricity and they can actually drive a car. In terms of politics, Pennsylvania is very much a swing state, being kind of even in terms of Republicans and Democrats in national elections and local elections. However, if you've been following me long enough, you'll know that I don't really think that means much these days. Did it really ever? There isn't a lot of Native American culture left here because a lot of that was gotten rid of during colonization. However, small native populations do exist here and there. And with that, I think I've covered as much ground as I wanted to. Pennsylvania is on the larger side, and because of how old it is, it's got all sorts of history, clearly has a big importance in the US Revolution, and its landscape does give all sorts of diversity and nature. Its Quaker settlements and religious communities do keep it in mostly a quieter, calmer part of life. However, the big cities are bustling and jam-packed with action and vibrance. Flavors of Dutch and German can be found everywhere, and because I've spent my whole life here, it kind of made sense to start the series with Pennsylvania. Thank you for sticking around to the end. I would certainly love some feedback on this. Goal would be to get to the other 49 in the long run. What did you like? What didn't you like? Give me a comment, as well as a like, share, and a subscribe. Until next time.